June 18th, 2022. I never expected to put these thoughts into words, because once I do, they become real. They become more than the cries and prayers and screams that only God and I have shared. Once I put them into some other form, they become something you can read and know, but could likely never understand. They become a last will and testament in a suicide note, left on the front seat of the car that drove me to this point, far past the places they teach us salvation can reach. But by the grace of God, that is not what this is. I'm Buddy Forbes, and this is Queerly Quilted. I was labeled a fag and started to believe it long before I even knew what it meant. From bullies on school buses to photos ripped from a yearbook, with a penis scribbled where my smile used to be. I didn't get it then, and I don't get it now. How a lack of knowledge could so easily become a lack of kindness. How seeds of ignorance planted into the growing heart could become senseless isolation. As the men around me failed to teach me how to be a man, I was left to my own devices. So finding faith made everything that much easier. In trying to heal the inside, I decided there was no room for the part of me that kept me on the outside. That part of me everyone else seemed to see, long before I even understood it, would have to stand back. So I shoved him aside and created the version of myself I am today. And I was always so proud of him for the strength it takes to hold the line and hide the truth behind a door that is barely left on its hinges. What I'm not proud of is the part of me that has been beating on that door, so confused about what he did to get there. Trying to pry the floors just to find the space to breathe, grasping with one hand for freedom, while using the other to hold out little pieces only God can see. Pieces that after decades of praying have yet to be repaired. In my journey to and through faith, I have made a lot of promises to God. Long ago, I decided to save myself for marriage, confident and eager to be married with kids, leading my family to the Lord by 25. That was 5 years ago. Deadline not met. But the promise created in me a strange sort of relationship with intimacy. A relationship that made every other relationship impossible. But the issue wasn't opportunity, it was openness. And it was something from an ex that truly hit me. I'll never know if it's the words she said that broke me or if the broken me brought out the words she said. She told me she dreamed of me, but not in the way you want someone to say it. In the dream, I told her I was incapable of loving her. Of course, I laughed it off, but I felt the sting because it wasn't the dream. It was how she felt. And I did that to her. Because it was true. How do you love someone when you are terrified you will never be able to give them what they deserve? How do you share with them a heart that is made of broken pieces full of the darkest parts that you swore would never see the light? See, I always told her I was an open book, but I never told her about the chapter written in the fold of every page scribbled out in disappearing ink. I'm attracted to men, and I always have been. I wrote those things in one of the darkest points of my life. I sat on the edge of an actual cliff, not knowing for sure if these words would ever leave that place. That was 2 years ago. Since then, I have shared these words with the people closest to me. In fact, that's how I came out to them. Because I don't really know another way to do things other than letting my heart and words just pour out onto paper. So even in my coming out, it had to be long, drawn-out novels to the people I love, because I want to make sure that the words I say are the words I mean. I think for far too long I hid so many words inside of me that now that they're finally coming out, I realize the importance and the impact of the things we say. This podcast is going to feature a lot of these same kind of stories. Not mine, but the stories of others. Other people who have been where I was. Other people who were in their darkest points and found light, found a way out. I understand the vulnerability that comes with sharing these kinds of stories. I know that asking someone to sit down with me and dive into what could potentially be heartbreaking and traumatic for them is not an easy thing to do. It's not easy to ask someone to do that. So if I'm going to be asking people to share their stories here, I have to be willing to do that same thing. I know the responsibility that I have in sharing these stories, because I know what it's like to have these stories inside of you, never knowing if you'll be able to share them. I don't take this lightly. I think this podcast is important. I think this podcast is needed. And not because I'm doing it, but because someone has to. You know, in fact, when I first started forming the foundation, I guess you would call it, of this podcast, one of my friends said, if you think there's an audience for it, then you should do it. And I thought about that a lot because I know there are so many podcasts featuring so many voices, sharing so many different stories, that anyone could choose literally anything else to listen to. So I thought about whether this was even an investment worth making, since it is a lot of work, especially if no one needed to hear it. But then I remembered my audience for this podcast. My audience is me, younger me who needed voices like mine to tell them it's okay. Younger me who needed a voice to tell him that being part of the LGBTQ plus community and being part of the Appalachian culture are not mutually exclusive. Younger me who needed voices that have sat in the front of the church, praying and praying to be fixed. Younger me who needed voices that were muffled for way too long behind a mask. Younger me who needed a voice to give him permission to find his own. This podcast is for those kids in the quiet, for those hearts in the closet, and for the folks who have never felt like they deserve to exist. And I hope this patchwork of people can become a comforting quilt in times of need, a beautiful display of colors that you can cling to when it all seems too dark. This is a reminder that you do not need to be fixed. You can just stitch yourself to the rest of the quilt. Each square a different story of someone who has been there and is still here. Those are the squares we're going to be sharing here. You are not alone. You know, Pride Month means something different to everyone. But June 2022, during Pride Month, is when I stood up, walked away from the cliff, and decided that I was no longer going to live my life dying. And I'm proud of that. And I'm proud of the community around me that has celebrated my decision to live, love, learn, and light up the stories of others who just want to do the same. June 19th, 2022. Why didn't you just jump? Whispered the all too familiar voice inside. You wrote it all down, and now you can leave it there for someone to find. But there is more to be said, so maybe I can make them understand. So though the voices want me dead, I turn them down, and up I stand. My pastor often says he believes God before he will let his children stray too far, will just go ahead and bring them home. He knows the Bible. He knows what he believes. What he doesn't know is how often I have met with God through guttural tears, begging him to do just that. But I'm still standing here. I'm still standing, and that has to mean something. I know what the chapters say. I know what the church says. Words and ideals shared through generations like a game of telephone for those who will never feel the crushing weight of what it means. Warnings shared through lineages and lifetimes, translations and time. Warnings I have always heeded, viewing this piece of me as a thorn in the flesh. My cross to bear. Hiding the sharp pain just under my skin until he takes me home. But the skin, like the breath in my lungs, has only grown tighter, and the thorn is poking out, showing itself to strangers as if it forgot about our pact. Through all of this, though I may not believe some of the words that come from congregations, I continue to hold to the truths that come from Christ. My mission as a Christian has never aligned with what would the church do. I have tried to consistently live and love with the mantra I wear on my wrist. The same wrist that is writing these words. What would Jesus do? And if I believe in all earnest that Christ sees the darkest parts of me, yet still chooses to cover them in light, who am I to not do the same? When I look at my life and my path, I never imagined pursuing this. I do not look to these feelings as a sort of relief, But every word here, which I don't expect will make sense to those whose heart they haven't poured out of, and every thought now penned in black ink on a real piece of paper, it is all true. It is all my truth. And without my truth, what is my testimony? So this is not a coming out. This is an outcome of decades of secrets, an outcome of decades of whispers, an outcome of love lost and life gained, an outcome of pent-up promises and more weight than any human should carry. Like a deadlift that I thought I could hold until death, I'm dropping it. And if you can't understand it, that's okay. After 30 years, neither can I. For me, a lot of this podcast is going to be about coming to terms with who I am out loud. Because I did so many silent years, and I'm done with that. Allowing other people to also share their stories out loud. Because they deserve to be told. And you deserve to hear them. Coming out for me was not really about a fear of telling the people around me. I've been blessed with a community of people who love me and support me, and even if they don't understand me, they respect me. And I don't know if that comes from the way I've lived my life over the last 30 years, or if that's just because I'm so blessed with the people in it. But it was never about them that I kept it all to me. I think I wasn't ready to admit who I was because I had built another version of myself. You know, I always wanted that white church wedding, wife, kids, all of it. But it wouldn't have been right. It wouldn't have been fair to not only me, but to another person to build a life around something that just simply was not true, just because I thought that's how it should have been. So that's why it took me 30 years to truly come out to myself and to everyone else. And I know I wasted so much time. And I don't want another kid to wait 30 years to share their truth. I don't want another adult to feel like they have to wait one more day to share their truth. Because for me, it was the most freeing and light-filling moment when people finally knew. It's like I can breathe for the first time. And I don't know how to explain that to someone who's never been there, because you really never can. But I do know how to explain it to someone who is there. I do know how to tell that person that one day you're going to breathe a breath of fresh air. And I know that I've been very lucky in my coming out process, if you want to call it that. I've received nothing but love and support from most of the people around me. The biggest contention for me has and will probably continue to be my relationship with the church. I'm still a Christian, and that's hard for some people to understand. But in my darkest moments, God was there. I've spent 30 years hearing his voice, so I know it when I hear it, and he's the one who told me to walk away from that cliff and jump in a different way, to jump into a life that is true, and to share my story. I know a lot of people, unfortunately, have a much more heartbreaking coming out story where they don't get the support, they don't have the community, and they feel ostracized. This is your support. This is your community. We are here for you. And I hope this podcast will be a sort of comfort for people, that someone's story will connect with what it is you're going through, but you will hear them sharing it on the other side, and you'll understand that you too can make it through. If you want to share your story of being an LGBTQ plus person in Appalachia, email queerlyquiltedpodcast@gmail.com or message on Facebook. If you want to share your story, but you're not ready to do it out loud with your own voice, you're just as important. You can send anonymous emails to the same email address, queerlyquiltedpodcast@gmail.com. This is not about forcing anyone into the spotlight, but bringing a light to those people who need it more than ever. I never really intended on sharing my story as an episode, but I know the responsibility I have when I ask other people to sit down and share their stories of some of the most heartbreaking, hard moments in their life. So if I'm going to ask someone to sit down with me and be vulnerable about their coming out story, about living in this region, then I'm going to do the same. So I'm sharing my story and the stories of others in hopes that no one else ever has to write something like I did. You can follow the show on Facebook and Instagram at Queerly Quilted. If you hear a story here and would like to share it with other people, please subscribe, share. That helps the podcast grow and get to other ears who may be in a place where they need to hear it. You are loved. You are needed. You are important. You are queerly quilted.